everyone, and welcome to Living One. I'm Olivia Crossman, your host. Living One is a monthly webinar series in which presenters from around the world share their vision for a future where all Earth beings live as one community in peace, dignity, and freedom. We ask the question, we know what's wrong, but what does right look like? This fall marked the beginning of Living One's 4th year, but today these conversations are more important than ever. For they are more than conversations. They are opportunities to build community, salve for the isolating wounds of our time. Today, we have the final session of our special autumn series, Recognition, Reparation, and Restoration. Over the last 6 weeks, workers have shared their experiences and insights in reparative and restorative work that forges healing paths for Earth's renewal. Recognition and reparation are necessary steps to erase the footprint of racism and speciesism. Reparation and reinstatement of Indigenous sovereignty are critical elements for spiritual and material renewal. We are delighted to have you join us for this final session as we continue to explore this important topic together. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various different Indigenous lands. I am currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Krulos Center for Nonviolence, located in Southern Oregon, is also the homelands of grizzly bear, takelma, and gray wolf. To recognize the land is to recognize the lasting effects of colonization, genocide, and oppression that still impact Indigenous communities today. But it is also an expression of gratitude and appreciation for the land and for all those whose homelands we live and work on. In the last of this 6-part series, we welcome Deena Metzger, writer, healer, and teacher whose work spans multiple genres, including the novel, poetry, nonfiction, and plays. She is the author of many books, including her latest novel, La Vieja, A Journal of Fire, A Reign of Nightbirds concerning 2 climatologists, La Negra y Blanca, Feral, and The Other Hand. Her other books include The Burden of Light, Ruin and Beauty, and Entering the Ghost River, Meditations on the Theory and Practice of Healing. Metzger co-edited Intimate Nature, The Bond Between Women and Animals, which pioneered the radical understanding that animals are highly intelligent and exhibit intent. Her experiences with elephants in the wild over 20 years is based on their spiritual agency and complex narrative communication. Some of that experience is chronicled in her novel La Vieja, and she has developed the 19 ways in the literature of restoration to change culture radically, restore climate, and counter extinction. Before we begin, let me share a few logistical notes. Deena will be speaking for about 45 minutes, after which we will open a question and answers period when you are invited to type your questions into the chat, which we will read after Deena's presentation. Also, please note that this Zoom session will be recorded, so if you would feel more comfortable leaving your camera off or changing your Zoom name, please feel free to do so. Finally, we ask that unless you are currently speaking, you keep your microphone muted to avoid any unintended interruptions. So, without further ado, we welcome Deena Metzger and Dr. Gay Bradshaw.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, everyone. Lovely to be here. Okay, Deena, I have something that I would like to start off with. It's in honor of your work and also how we met. So everyone, sit back for a moment. On behalf of the Indian nations, Vine Deloria Jr. demanded of white America, we talk, you listen. I think that the elephant's plea is much the same. By listening, we are asked to ethically and practically challenge what has seemed indelible, the uniqueness and privilege of being human. We are asked to be a part of elephant suffering, to own what has happened. Sorry, just advertisement break here. We are asked to be part of the elephant suffering, to own what has happened and is happening to elephants and the earth as something that involves us as much as them. The elephant experience entreats us to come around the fire ring, to sit and listen while the embers burn and the clear night domes above, much like our ancestors did, thousands and thousands of years ago. For in the elephant's tail is a story of our own past, and poignantly, what can be our future. Even more important, it is not so much that elephants are like us, they are us, and we them. That is the lesson the chimpanzee instilled in me, and what I hope to pass on to you. That's a passage from the prologue of Elephants on the Edge, and that's how Deena and I met, was with and through the elephants. So I wanted to share that and thank them.
With and through the elephants, but with and through your understanding, which was so radical and thrilling to come across, that for me, that there was someone who understood that the elephants were profoundly intelligent and that they communicated, and that we could listen and learn. And I think when I met the elephants in that way and began listening, maybe 1997, my life changed entirely. And I think my life changed entirely when I met you, because it was such a sense of alliance in a world that is treating the elephants, the animals, with such violence. And you understood their suffering as well as their great beauty. So imagine that we might engage in ways of life and in actions that could help to restore a world where the elephants are able to live without ongoing terror, and where we as a species are no longer creating terror in the world. Now, I can't say that about all humans. So, because of course, indigenous people did not create terror for animals or for trees or for other beings. And if sometimes they participate in that now, I think it is because they have been colonized. It's so hard to escape colonization, so hard to live outside of colonial mind and demands. So I just want to give that, to say that in the beginning. When I speak about how human beings are acting, I am not speaking about indigenous culture. So what do we want to restore? Okay.
Talk a little bit before you talk about what do you describe what restoration is for you?
A restoration of a world and a way of living where the human world mirrors the natural world, which is entirely interconnected. So an ecocentric world in which the non-human beings are not terrified, in which violence is not at the core, that is earth-centered and spirit-centered and beautiful and kind, where we really understand with every aspect of our beings the essential importance of interconnection, which means respect for all beings. You know that Lakota Sioux phrase, Mitakio Yasin, all my relations. So I think if all human beings participated in a culture where they said, at the end of the day, at the end of every conversation all my relations. In other words, if we remembered many times during the day that we are all related, that's all we have to do. Everything would change. And so I look for ways that our minds will change, that they will become sane again, and where our culture will be sane. And I look to see what actions can we take that do not lead automatically to climate dissolution or to extinction or to social and political chaos. Because that's where our culture is taking us. It's a direct line. And I would like to restore, or to have restored, to be part of restoring, to gather people together into restoring the old ways.
What do you think is the way you're describing is something that feels really positive. I mean, it feels warm, it feels secure, it feels comforting. And what then impedes that natural gravitation? I mean, we as an organism, we like to feel good, so what you're describing and what, you've described an experience and what others experience, what is so great that holds us back from that gravitational pull to oneness?
To be honest with you, that is a constant question. And I know we could come up with several answers. I have not found any that make any sense to me. I do not understand it. I think we are mad. I think these days, though it certainly didn't begin in the last years, these days we're driven by the media and its interest in power, its greed, its shallowness. But where does that come from? When did people get disconnected? I could say, but I don't want to go into that conversation, that monotheism disconnected us from the natural world. That a kind of egocentrism came in, human egocentrism and a desire for power came in with Judaism, it came in with Christianity, echoed by Islam. And those were not the only imperial religions. Some fantasy about power. But it's not interesting to me how it started. What's interesting to me is for us to look at how we inadvertently participate in exactly what hurts us so much. So in the 19 ways, for example, which were ways of changing our mind and promoting restoration, which just came to me, one of those blessings that landed on me one way. So one of the things that is important in the 19 ways is to bear witness. And the way to bear witness is to look at what really, really hurts you in the world. It may be poaching, or it may be cutting off mountaintops, or it may be mining, or whatever it is that really, really hurts you. And to see how inadvertently we participate in that. And then engaging in the very, very difficult task of withdrawing. But it's easier to withdraw if you locate the place where you recognize that you're doing harm. In that place that breaks your heart, we can withdraw from that place. We can say, no, I will not live that way. And so then to go, as you were saying, Gay, to what's beautiful, if we withdraw from what causes so much pain, then inevitably we're turning to the opposite, which is to create joy and to create beauty and to see how everything can thrive. And one of the other things that's essential to the 19 ways is beauty. The thing about animals is they're so incredibly beautiful, and the natural world is so very beautiful. Not Hollywood beauty and not fashion beauty, but the real beauty that just takes your breath away, like the twists and turns of a tree, or sunsets, or sunrise. Well, one of the things about going to Africa and being on safari is that we watch animals move in their own ways. And they're so beautiful. See elephants walking with the little ones, kind of cuddling in to the matriarchs, and the love between them. Some incredible moments, and I'm just spinning here. You better come in and pull me out.
No, keep going, keep spinning.
So Mashatsu, which is a preserve in southern Botswana. We were there around, I think we were there around New Year's, and there were these yellow flowers that completely covered the grass. I mean, it was brilliant yellow and brilliant green. And the elephants were taking the flowers, they're picking the flowers, and they're putting them on their heads. Now, they always cover themselves with mud or dust to protect them from the sun. But these flowers were not going to protect them from the sun. They were just so beautiful. And so we're restoring a possible world. And my work has been to find any possible way that we can restore culture. So, since 2004, I've been convening something called Revisioning Medicine. And it asks the question, is it possible to create a medical system, recreate, restore, remember a medical system that does no harm? Imagine if you did not have to worry about how the pharmaceutical that's prescribed for you, imagine if you didn't have to worry about the side effects. If you wouldn't be afraid that you would be sicker from that. If the questions that researchers asked were different, not how can we kill the cancer cell? How can we transform a cancer cell that has already been destroyed by its by being affected by the environment, by the pesticides and the pollutants and the energy systems? What if we could restore it instead of killing it? So Can a medical system not do harm? Can literature lead to restoration and the relationship of all life rather than leading to extinction?
Is restoration, the way you're talking about it, really a deconstruction? I mean, not to play semantics, but in the sense of, moving away from human exceptionalism. So in the case of the, revisioning the medical system, what about no medical system other than, it just seems that the restoration is really a returning to being in alignment and happy enough to be in alignment the way the rest of nature works.
Well, a medical system that's in alignment so that, elephants seek out medicines, and they treat each other. The matriarch knows the land. The matriarch knows where the water holes are. The matriarch knows the migration system, and the matriarch knows the medicines. So it's not being without treatments. It's not being without concern about how we are physically. It's just not thinking in terms of killing. That would be a beginning. Let's think medically, let's think in terms of restoration. Can we, instead of finding what's pathological, can we find what's healthy in the person and enhance that and expand that? That's a different mind.
And you've already, just in the beginning, talking, when you mentioned just the language of restoration, as you began this conversation, and we talked about it. In the sense of that, what I wrote, what I heard, what I wrote, what I communicated, what you heard with the elephants, that was a non-exclusionary, non-isolating process. So that leads into what you've written extensively about, and are still working with, is language of restoration.
The language, the literature of restoration, it is, I think, essentially nonviolent. We'll start with that. And I know that that you and I have this passion of nonviolence and language, nonviolence between beings, nonviolence against animals, nonviolence against the earth. So a restored system would be nonviolent to begin with. It would be interconnected.
You just talked about in the medical, in other words, that the choice of words, where you're not using the word kill, you're using the word transform.
You're not doing war on drugs, war on cancer, war on everything. It's like they're looking for this ongoing war that they can be engaged in. Can we be engaged in restoring health? Can we be engaged in no longer creating the situations that cause illness? When I have to go to a physician and she or he prescribes something, I will ask, and what effect will this medicine have on the earth? And they look at me blankly. Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know if they've even tested that. I said, well, it's likely they haven't tested it. Why not? So, and can physicians be empowered again to be able to have the relationship with their clients that's exactly how a Native American medicine person will relate to the person in the village, in the community that is ill. I mean, the entire community will gather to try to bring healing. I was married a long time ago, feels like lifetimes ago, to a physician. And when we first got married, he was interning at Harbor General Hospital in Los Angeles. And I remember he came home quite astonished. He had a Roma patient, and the Roma people, the family, which was about 30 or 40 people, took over the parking lot, and they set up their tents, and they set up their cooking facilities, and they set up everything so that they could be with the person who was ill. And I know that my experience with Native American people here, they have often felt the Western doctor can cure the Western illness, but the real healing comes from the community and the medical people. So you can go to the hospital and you can get treated. And I write a lot about this in A Reign of Nightbirds, where there is an American doctor who is doing his service rather than going into to Vietnam. He's serving on the Deena Reservation, Four Corners Reservation. And he meets a medicine person who educates him about healing. So part of the book is the restoration of this man's healing understanding. But one of the first essential activities is to have a deep caring relationship with the one who was suffering, as opposed to, let's say, psychology or psychiatry, where when there used to be psychiatrists who actually worked with you on issues and didn't just give you drugs in the old days. When I was younger, that you went to someone who could help you heal and cared about that. But they were forbidden to tell you anything about who they were. They had to be anonymous so that you could, quote, project on them, as opposed to having a real relationship. And so when I started working with people therapeutically, I worked with them, first forbidden thing, in my house, and secondly, would tell them anything they wanted to know about me, because they needed to know what my values were. They needed to know where I was coming from, needed to be able to evaluate what I was saying. So maybe we're just going back to the old ways, and watching the animals and watching the trees, watching the non-human beings and how they live, and learning from them. So now we go back to what you wrote originally about listening.
It seems that, that one of the things that I think has been accentuated by the pandemic, et cetera, has been really revealing how, I'm obviously United States Eurocentric speaking right now, but how poorly we really relate to each other, even what I would say in the most ordinary kinds of circumstances, that there really isn't a common substrate of relationship of which you're speaking of. And maybe there are these moments of intersection in a crisis, situation, which is perhaps why, things are so significant for many people if there's a crisis, where there's a fire where people come together, but there really isn't a sustaining, at least that's my experience, is not a sustaining substrate, relational and soul substrate of trust. I think it's mistrust. And what do you think about that in terms of the restoration? So it's not just what we do and what we hear, but also who we are in a fundamental way. Maybe this circles back to we are all relations.
Well, I think it does come back to that. When we started Dare, which was a monthly meeting on behalf, a monthly community meeting on behalf of healing, and we started it on the patio right out there, and we said anyone who walks through that turquoise door is a member of Dare. And we met once a month. Now we do it on Zoom. We met once a month, but what happened is that the people who gathered mattered to each other. We know each other's stories. We are concerned with each other. I'm looking at some of these people here. Margie, I don't know how many years I know you, 30 years, maybe. I know your family, right? You know my family. We meet in various places. How do you restore relationship and interconnection? Gregory Taheti is a brilliant Tewa writer, and he wrote a book called Native Science, and it's about interconnection. It's about really showing us the mind that flourishes when interconnection is real. So, I do have to say, as I'm looking at these faces, I've got a lot of love here for a lot of people, and that caring, which feels so reciprocal, is reliable. That feels very important, that we can rely on each other. When we met in person, then we could see how our lives were entangled, and we were interdependent and interconnected, and we could count on it. It's really harder with Zoom, but I think that's what feels essential, because we're probably going to remain on Zoom forever, because now it gives us access to each other in different places. And Lori, for example, is in Massachusetts, and I can no longer ask her to fly out every month, which she did before, because I don't think we can fly anymore. So it's essential to be on Zoom together, but how do we retain or create lives in which we're really interconnected? What happens to Lori matters to me and is part of my thinking, and that I extend myself to. But back to what you were saying before, this is about joy. It's about the joy of coming together. That is, coming together is a joyous event. Coming together with respect. Coming together in willing honesty. Coming together in truth.
I think what I experience is I'm not so important. That's what I find in the comfort zone, is that the self is not so important. There isn't that even concept of a self, or the self is just a completely different. Again, this is not to be semantics, but we're getting back to the limits of the constraints of language. But that's the experience. And that's the experience that I think a lot of people have. I certainly do with non-humans. Is there's no preoccupation with self. There's definitely, everyone's accountable for their quote unquote self, but the preoccupation is in a very different space.
That's interesting. When you read about elephants suffering and the way the elephants gather around someone who is ill, I'm just aware that the attention which they offer us, the attention is on the gathering. So an individual is suffering, but the big I isn't there. What's there is the awareness of the suffering and the gathering around them. So what we don't understand, what Euro-Americans don't understand, is the word we. And it's very hard. You have to teach, you have to make visible a different way of living. That, the only thing I can do is this, the gesture of embracing, of holding, of creating that circle. When what one is concerned with is not the one, but that sense, what you said the elephant is us and we are the elephant. What that means is that we care about that being, not as if it were ourselves. We care about ourselves as over there where the elephant is. I don't know how to explain it, but
well, it's very much in the way that Mary Watkins describes mutual accompaniment, where there, I call it living beyond difference. There's diversity, which is different than, and not the capital D diversity that is in the vernacular now, but in the sense of there's diversity, but there's not difference. And again, the way I describe it, I relate to parrots, for example, that they have a flock psyche. So the elephants have this, flock psyche. I mean, that's my interpretation and my understanding is that and I see that with, in different ways with the animals here. So, for example, one of our rabbits passed recently, and there's a constellation of 5, and it really affected them. I mean, it affected them in the sense of, again, the way this is what I've described it for the elephants, like there's this psychic net. And that's what I kind of later reflected on, that the reason that we were seeing quote unquote PTSD on a global scale was because the integrity of the net had been cut and cut and cut and cut. So it was not just individuals. It was a cohesion that had been lost after so much violence. And there was a kind of a disintegration. And so to me, that's my feeling. And I guess it's also my experience, like with the rabbits, is that they really felt not just the loss of that person, but it was a tear in this sort of psychic, fabric or net, whatever you want to call it. And then there's a kind of a resilience and a rebounding in the sense of reconfiguration, reconstellation, as a natural process in that way. And I was just thinking about the term we. I agree. And I think, quote unquote, of late, there is a sensitivity, reactivity of we, just like, Vine said, we talk, you listen, and, there's that kind of joke, who's we, Kimosabi, you know what I mean? So I think that there's all these different kinds of patterns and currency that are going on about we. And it's as you talked about, it's a remembering. And Mary also talked about that. I mentioned to her about how our culture was so looking, the Euro-American, so forward, and there is no sense of the quote unquote past, or the fact that we're part of this maybe bigger, as I experienced one time, this carpet unrolling. I'm just one of the threads on this carpet. It had to be having to do with the matrilineal line that, I come from. But, I said, there's an amnesia, and Mary corrected me. She said, no, it's really just it's a remembering. There was no memory. And so this process of accompaniment, reparation, however you want to call it, is a remembering in a very fundamental way of who we are, the fundamental sense of identity and place.
And the various meanings of remembering. I mean, you can't really remember unless you bring all the parts back in, and live within the field that contains all the different parts, all the different members, all the different beings, each one contributing to the entire consciousness, and a consciousness coming out of what we are together. What I realized a moment ago when I was trying to explain we and I, that the English language did not allow me to speak about it. It does not allow me to speak we. And I think I would need to speak, which I don't, a native language in order to really be able to communicate we. And that's why, or that's one of the reasons that I say, watch the interconnections of the non-human beings, and then understand, getting away from that I word, and then that understanding can open up. We can enter into that understanding.
How do we use language? We're talking about returning and remembering and non-exclusion of other beings. How do we use our language, what we've got? And I guess this is your language of restoration. We've talked a little bit about that, but how do we use it in such a way that it no longer excludes conversation and the conversations of the non-human beings? How do we engage, like say you and me, how do we, you and me right now, I'm surrounded by trees, you are too, one way or the other, air, birds. How do we have conversation? How do we, obviously this is not like immediate transition, but how do we start to move so that they are a partner, a fundamental partner in the conversation?
Well, I think what we did in this conversation feels important, that we started out talking about the elephants. And so we started out talking about the animals and how silly it would be to have a conversation, a deep conversation, that does not include the non-human beings, and that does not include the land and where we come from and how it shapes us. It doesn't include the weather, doesn't include climate. I mean, I'm in Los Angeles, which has had the most horrific drought, and it rains all night and all morning. What a gift. So I come to this conversation feeling blessed. There are puddles on the patio. It's really quite gorgeous. And the sky is reflected in the branches of the eucalyptus trees. And all of this is essential nature. So one could talk about, oh, I have this headache. Oh, this hurts me. Oh, this makes me sad. Or, oh, the eucalyptus tree is here. It rained. Little bird came came by, a little finch. The robins are here when they shouldn't be here. That's a concern, and so on. The non-humans become an intrinsic part of the conversation. And for me, the literature of restoration not only brings the non-humans in the natural world as essential element to any conversation or any writing, but it also brings spirit in, that we are not the evolutionary consequence of great interest. We're just another being in this glorious, complex world that for me is informed by and can be guided by, if we were open to it, spirit. So
if we flash forward, your vision flashing forward, that we have gone through this evolution, what do you see our language being? Is it going to be something that, when I say language, the voice and the words on paper or whatever medium, and other types of communiques, do you see those as just punctuation marks? In other words, that there is quiet and there is it's a little bit of a punctuation. Do you see that as just transformation? In other words, that it's a transformed, that we are using it in the way we are, but not in the same vocabulary, not in the same spirit. What do you see our relationship with language and our use of language evolving to?
Language creates culture. So if we have to shift the culture so that we can survive, so that all beings can survive, so that life can thrive, if you put that at the center, life thriving is the necessary goal. Everything has to change. I wrote this essay called Not Hope, but Possibility. And I'd like to read the last 2 paragraphs, if I can. I think it'll give you a sense of where I'm going. So I say, imagine a literature by its morphing and fractal shapes, by its refusal to be cut off from the past or the future, by its insistence on including the vastness and particularity of the imagination. A literature that says yes, and yes, and yes, that allows all the life forms to coexist in dynamic relationship. Imagine such a possibility. And finally, prayer. A literature that allows prayer. Great spirit. Great heart. Great mystery. Awesome presence. Ancestors and future beings, thank you for your presence in our lives. Thank you for our lives. May we find the words that are needed in this time. May we have the language to speak what must be spoken. May all the stories that need to be told be told. May we not hold back what needs to be made visible. May we have the courage to look at everything without denying the terrible truths of our lives. May we have insight and vision. May we discover the language of the heart. May our words be true, and may they be courageous. May the earth be restored. May there be viable futures for all beings, and may our words help bring such possibilities to life. Aho.
Thank you, Deena.
It's quite, it's an honor and a deep, deep satisfaction to really pray in a public venue. And for Spirit to be here with us. So thank you for that opportunity.
Now I'll share you with others who are listening.
If anyone has any questions, I'm sure we do, for Deena, please feel free to type them in the chat, or if you would prefer to ask your own question, you can use the raise hand button and unmute yourself to speak and share your question. Yeah, Raymond.
Hi, Deena.
Hi, Raymond.
It's good to see you again.
Yes.
And Gay. And just personally, how you changed my life just for meeting you. Because you remember at the conference when I was going to give my speech, and we talked just briefly, and that changed everything. And not the funny part, but the sad part was half of those people in that room who were quote unquote elephant experts did not even know that. Yet they were considered the experts because they hadn't learned how to, I guess, talk to elephants and to get along with them. And that was so interesting to me because they're the ones now that still have them, whether they're in zoos or whatever. But it didn't take much to learn how to get along with them. And I just wanted to say thank you for doing that for me. It was very touching. And say hi to Cynthia for me when you see her again.
Well, what an honor it was to have that intimate a conversation with you. You know, we were talking heart to heart.
Yeah, and I was just trying to swap your necklace for my bracelet, remember? Remember? And then all of a sudden we started talking about elephants and you brought it up and it was very nice. It was very nice. It was very touching.
Yeah, it was
beautiful. So I will hopefully see you again one day soon.
Yeah, hope so.
My daughter lives right off of Laurel Canyon.
Well, you threatened.
I know I threatened you. I'm going to come out still, I promise.
Yeah, I remember that threat.
I promise I will. I'll go through on that threat. So it's great to see you again. I'm sure other people want to ask questions, but I miss talking to you. I can't wait to do it again.
Thank you, Raymond.
Thank you, Raymond. Anyone else like to ask a question? As people get going, I have a few questions definitely as well. Deena, you mentioned a lot of in your conversation, a lot of the different ways that you list as paths to a viable future. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about story as a way to a viable future and how you envision that, the power of a story, and I guess how you've experienced that in your own writing of stories and poems and whatnot.
Well, for me, story is a living event. It's a field of connections. It's the evidence of interrelationship. And so what we often say in our circles is that we're living a story. We suddenly recognize that we are woven into, we are woven by events into a story. So I'm living a story with elephants. I met the ambassador in 1997, I think, or no, 1999. And I met him at a certain place at the last hour before we had to leave Chobe. And every time I've returned, and I think it's been about 8 times, 12 times, who remembers, we go to the same tree, the same spot, the same tree, the same hour, and we wait. and the ambassador and his herd come. And then there is something they do that is a story. They act, it's like they create a theater piece. And you can't deny that there's a conversation going on. So to be in a story is to recognize how all these events, that you didn't choreograph them, that a series of events have been drawn together and they are leading you somewhere. So, if we had many hours, I could actually tell you the stories of about 12 people that are sitting here, maybe more than that. A story is the living narrative emanation of deep meaning. And stories, when we understand them, they teach us how to live. So often being ill is the story of the illness. What is the story the illness is telling? Where is the illness taking you? What is the wisdom? What are you learning that you might not learn any other way at all? So you've been knocked flat on your ass because you weren't listening. It's very interesting. People are coming on, they're showing their faces, and I'm looking at, for me, it's like, oh, all these stories are appearing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Beautiful. Thank you. Does anyone else have a question for Deena? If you can't find the raise hand option, please feel free to just unmute yourself or, of course, type it in the chat if that's easier.
Well, the story, Deena, I'll fill in and someone can interrupt me, is, to me, it's like the voice, like I was talking about, the substrate. There's the continuity. You're no longer an object, or as you called it, an event. There's automatic connection. There's automatic oneness.
I can only talk about it intimately, and I can say the story is why Kip is here, and how we're in a story of redeeming an activity that my father was engaged in. So in some way, I'm making amends. So our meeting has to do with the process of making amends. And Mimi and I share a deep connection to Chile. And so we're involved in a story of Allende and of the Mapuche people. And it's, it's amazing. And Cheryl is a storyteller in the old ways and lives on the land, and is one of the people who is remembering in a very profound way how stories used to be told, how the animals told the stories, and how her people told the stories, and how we might remember it. So it's so particular for me. If I were in class, I would be naming all the stories, and but we don't all know them. But it feels so important to carry each other's history, like Raymond's history at the San Diego Zoo, and why he left, what he learned, who he is, what he offered, why he left. Yeah.
Beautiful, Deena. And Brett just typed into the chat. He said, "Hi, Deena. Recognize and withdraw from the place that breaks your heart, that causes so much pain. Thank you for this profound insight, so restorative in itself.
Thank you, Britt.
Brett hails from South Africa, the
Oh
Karoo.
my. Oh, well. What a story South Africa is. Yeah. And thank you
Absolutely.
for mentioning heartbreak, because that I think is the core. We must recognize what breaks our heart and meet it. And also to know that when we change our lives and the way we respond, when we change our assumptions, when we change our relationships, it really matters. It makes a difference. Culture is contagious, and ways of living are contagious. And a field changes, and more people are absorbed into the field, and that common, beautiful common consciousness of possibility emerges.
Something that I find that when people tell a story or something, it always has to be, I'm talking about in the present tense, new. But in a lot of traditional, certainly in my family, there was a lot of joy and deepness when you heard the same story over and over and over. And in fact, it was relished. You know, it just sort of, it brought a depth with every telling.
And we say that all the time in our circles. Oh, could you tell that story again? Can you tell that dream again? Sort of like I want to say, someone in the circle must have a dream to end. That it's exactly the right dream to end this with. Joanna, you have a dream? You have the right dream? You have a dream about relationship? You have a dream about becoming an animal?
I
You have
do.
a short dream about becoming an animal?
I could tell a dream about a wolf.
Why don't you tell a dream about a wolf?
Dream is that I am on a mountain and there is a stone slab at the top of the mountain. And there's something happening with it. There is a person lifting itself off of the rock from another person, like two black pieces of cloth separating from each other, a man and a woman. The woman separates from the man on this slab, and then the woman becomes a beautiful person with long brown hair and a black dress, and starts to walk down the mountainside. And I look and I feel torn because I don't know whether to follow the man or the woman, and I feel kind of compelled to do both. But when I look back at the top of that slab, there is no man, it's just a rock. And I run after the woman who was walking down the hill. And I realize that I'm not human. I am a wolf, or a four-legged. I don't even call myself a wolf. I don't call myself anything because I am the creature that is running down with four legs. I feel the connection to the ground underneath me. I see my paws going down the hill. I feel the branches going past my fur. And I know that I am completely loyal to this woman who is being created from the rock. And we walk into a village and we are accosted by people in this adobe building who come to us. And I feel the grasping of these humans, and I don't like it. It doesn't feel right to me. They call her Angelica, but I know that's not her real name. There's another name that's ancient and old. This is just a name given by these people who notice that this is something unusual. And I feel a deep sense of loyalty and affinity for this woman. And we walk, I kind of get her out of there, and we go on to walk and walk and walk together as four-legged possible wolf and woman through the forest for the ages and to heal the world.
So the wolf has agency. And, for the dream spirits to send a dream, particularly to someone like Johanna, because she's going to be able to tell the dream to a community, which is the old ways. So for Johanna to have a dream that we now know, in which the wolf or the four-legged has the agency to rescue this two-legged from the pretty alienated community and to walk back into the forest. So, I think dreams come to us to teach us, to tell us how to live. And we spend a lot of time listening to dreams. That's also something that's very important about the literature of restoration. Dreams are taken seriously, and that makes a difference. You don't even only have to ask a question. You can come in and say something and contribute to the circle.
Yes, please join the fireside circle.
Yes, absolutely. Cheryl, anytime you want to come in, And that's another shift. We have to do this together. We have to bring our heart minds together to make the changes that we want to come to be.
I'll share a dream. It wasn't mine, but it was told to me.
Hey.
And that was way back when. And I was starting this sabbatical with this, I look at it now, absolutely ridiculous premise. Although there were very kind people who encouraged me. My mentor, Vine, was one of them, a very most amazingly kind-hearted man. And that was to bring together Western science and Native science, which I can tell you some very funny stories. As one Hopi man and I got together, and he and his wife was an artist, and my partner at the time went off and had a great time, and this man and I ended up getting migraines together. And so he had been working with the tribe. He was Hopi. He'd come back. This is a segue to the dream, but one of the things that he was responsible for was creating these computerized maps that the government used. So they wanted to say, okay, we need to know where the sacred sites are, so then we won't be interfering in any way. And so, of course, the Hopi elders, well, we can't reveal that information. And so, anyways, I'm just telling you that to me, that was just a sort of a cameo of this idea of integrating Western and Native science. But in that, Vine had introduced me to many wonderful elders. And this one gentleman shared with me a dream that he'd had, and he was very disturbed by it. And he passed not too long after that. And that dream was as he was in the forest, and one by one, the animals came to him. The stag came to him. The snake came to him. The wolf, the salmon, the puma, the hawk, and all of them came and they gathered around him. And they told him that they were leaving because they couldn't live in this violent and sad world anymore. And so they were leaving, and he was just, it was very disturbing and profound. And so he shared that dream. And so for me, what came out of it and what he and I talked about is, how do we call back the animals?
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that's a kind of a dream, an image that is always present. How do we call back the animals? Am I calling back the animals at this moment?
Well, the first thing we have to do is to create a situation for them that they will survive. It would be horrific to call them back and have them suffer the violence again that's causing them to leave. On the one hand, I want to say that. On the other hand, that's exactly, you may recall, Gay, what is talked about in La Vieja, where the writer speaks of the work of Bernie Krause, who wrote a book called The Animal Orchestra. And his understanding was that when an animal disappears from the site where that animal lives in the wild, and the animal's song leaves, the net is fractured, is torn, that the animals recognize that there is a whole, that sound creates an integrated world, and when the animal leaves, that sound leaves, and the sound is torn. So in La Vieja, a Journal of Fire, I imagined an animal orchestra, literally to call the animals back, and imagine human musicians, each one of them taking an animal that had left or had gone extinct and carrying their song, so that the humans and the animals came together in the forest and played the songs again, with the hope that hearing their song and hearing the heart from which it was sung, that they would come back, that they would come back. But we must change. We must make a safe place. The forest and the wild has to be a safe place for the animals to come back. And we have to commit ourselves to that, so that everything we do has the question behind it. How will this action affect the entire world? Does this action I'm about to take make things safer? Or are these words that I'm going to say, do they make things safer? Or ultimately, will they do harm? That rigorous scrutiny that each one of us is called to. No exceptions. And then the animals will sing to us. And we certainly know what wolf song is.
That's so beautiful, Deena. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any final thoughts or dreams or questions that they'd like to share? All right, then, Gay, any last thoughts? Or is it time to wrap up?
Oh, I could go on forever. Don't ask me that. Well, I will make one comment, Deena, because of Charlie. Charlie would call it fitting in, what you just described.
Yeah.
You know, fitting in is kind of an inaction before action.
Can you say more about that? What he meant?
Well, that was my word of translating from inaction before action. Fitting in is just well, I would describe it as a, letting go of ego. I mean, that's the way to describe it. And Charlie was certainly.
Why don't you tell a Charlie story?
Okay. Oh, let me count the ways. Let's see.
Oh, how he became a nanny.
Okay, I'll talk about that.
Some levels to it.
Well, basically, Charlie went to Russia. Charlie Russell went to Kamchatka, which is this peninsula, and he wanted to live there with the bears as an experiment for himself, but basically to demonstrate how easy it was to live with these quote unquote fearsome creatures. And he was there, and what happened is something that he didn't plan, and he was asked to take in 3 orphan baby brown bears. Brown bears are essentially grizzlies that live in Kamchatka area. And so he had these baby brown bear orphans, and he took care of them and essentially had to learn how to be a mother bear. And at one point, very early on, there was a female brown bear that just kind of started watching him and hanging out. And he would go to the lake to fill water to cook with and things. And she was right there. And she was very present. And one day she had babies. She had little baby bears, and she brought them by and then left. So Charlie was kind of left there standing there watching her retreat, and the little baby bears were playing and having a great time. And she came back after a few hours. And that happened over and over and over. So he became this nanny. And he was very fond of saying, she never asked. It wasn't, he was conscripted. He was basically recruited. No questions asked. And he was nanny for 3 sets of her cubs. And they knew each other for over 7 years. And she was very instrumental and took him on as a student, to teach him how to be part of the bear community and the ethics, and how to mother, which is the same thing. It's really a teacher and a friend and a mentor in that way. And he called her Brandy. So that they had a very, very profound relationship. And it was, Charlie was called up on the carpet. He would goof off with the bears, and she'd get pissed off and run roaring at him, and he'd say, I realized I was just goofing, and she was at work. She was looking at salmon, trying to do that. And here I was just goofing around like a kid with the bears, with the babies. So there was really a depth and dimensions on both sides. For me, I just, with every storytelling, it's just deeper and deeper about these incredible individuals, and also the ordinariness of the whole thing, that all of these things should be happening. They're natural. And there was something that she decided to take him on, and he was a male human. And pretty much all male humans had guns and killed. And she was, as he said, kind of a, picky. She didn't tolerate fools, I'll put it that way. And so there was a lot of just really beauty in that relationship, most of which is really not relatable in the human language. But Charlie was definitely fitting in the sense of that there, it's like if you could run a scanner over the landscape, you couldn't pick out Charlie from the rest of the landscape. That's the best way I can describe it.
That's beautiful. So his psyche so integrated to the natural world that you couldn't pick him out. What an incredible goal that is. That we might live that way.
And one thing that really struck me about this was also, gets into the fitting in, is, and this was a couple people that knew Charlie quite well. They'd say he was tough. And this one man was a captain of a boat up in the Northwest. And he said, you know, I'm pretty tough. But he said, I was nothing compared to Charlie. And the way I would describe that, as you see it, is that Charlie, just like I see the deer here, I see the bear, they really don't make a big deal out of life in the sense of their own pain and suffering. I mean, they definitely suffer, they definitely have pain, but they stay within the grain. And that's the way Charlie was. You know, there's just, like I said, this continuity. And I think that's really, you know, we call it the ego. There's no ego that's protruding,
Right.
you know, in that way. It's all seamless. And there is individuality, but it's an individuality that doesn't break the whole, doesn't break from the whole.
Yeah.
Well, that's my bear story of Charlie.
Right.
Vieja wrote into the chat that if anyone is interested in learning more about Charlie's story, you can check out Gay's book, Talking with Bears, Conversations with Charlie Russell. That's a great way to hear more about his work. And also the film, The Edge of Eden, Living with Grizzlies, is also a really, really powerful film about Charlie's life and work. I'll send that in the chat as well.
And that's online. It's for free. It's a BBC. It was produced by Jeff and Sue Turner, who are friends of Charlie's, showing him in Kamchatka. And he wrote a book called Grizzly Heart, which is describing his experience there.
Yeah.
Grizzly Heart. All right, I've sent that one in the chat as well. Yeah, those are all available online. And like Gabe said, the film is free for anyone to check out if they want to hear more about Charlie's work, and that he does exemplify so much of what we were talking about. Everything that I've learned about him from Gay and from reading and learning about him online is really inspiring. So we highly recommend it, definitely. All right. Well, if anyone has any final thoughts, dreams, stories, questions they'd like to share.
I'm going to call someone out. I just noticed that Sharon English is here. I'm sorry to do that to you, honey. And she is.
That's your privilege.
Sharon, are you there? Can you come on?
Yep, I'm here.
There she is. Sharon has just written a marvelous novel, which is a finest example of the literature of restoration. Would you talk about your book for a second? You can talk about, I'll give you a hint because I know you're thinking, what in the world does she want me to do here? I want you to tell the title of the book and talk about moths, perhaps. And you can also talk, what's so interesting to me about the book is that it is so centered in the earth and the land in the most unlikely place that you have connected.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Deena. So the book is called hi everyone. And first of all, I did join very late, but it's been amazing just to be here for the last 20 minutes. The book I wrote is called Night in the World. I've got it right here. That's what it looks like. And the unlikely place. So it is a book about coming home or the unraveling within that happens as we try to come home to the earth in these times. And it's set in a city. It's set in Toronto, where I lived for over 20 years. So it is very urban. It's people living very modern urban lives. And how reconnection with the natural world, or connection maybe even for the first time ever, is possible even in that kind of setting, and which it of course has to happen in that kind of setting because that's where most of us live. So one of the characters is a budding biologist, and she's studying moths. And those are actually the sections of the book that are not so much in the city. But that her story, it's in the book is 3 different characters, and her story is really a story about learning to listen to moths and understand their agency, I guess.
Yeah. It's
and unravel the scientific break the scientific lens that she's being indoctrinated into, to regard moths from that angle only. Yeah, so that's her struggle.
You want to read a passage, Cheryl?
I don't know if thank you, but I don't know if I've got one like I could just jump into. For what I would do, it's a big book. Sorry, Gay. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's amazing. Is there anywhere, if people are interested in purchasing the book, that you would direct them to? I can put that into the chat.
Oh, thank you. Well, my publisher is Freehand Books. I'll put that in the chat if you want.
Awesome. Yeah.
They're actually having a sale on it right now. So
perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much.
If I can ask you, Cheryl, or Deena, and of your other friends on this, to reflect on how working with Deena and your writing, how that has brought you into this world. Sharon, I'm sorry, is it Cheryl?
Sharon.
Sherry.
Sharon. Sorry, I don't know why my name's cut off. Sharon. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So in other words, can you perhaps talk about that experience, or, was that a path of your reconnection or revitalization or enhancement?
Working with Deena, yeah, absolutely. I've been working with Deena since about 2015, and it's I would say that like I was on this path of exploration and a desperate yearning to live the 19 ways that she teaches, but I had no teacher and I had no community. So it was it's terrible. And so a lot of my energy went into angst, and melancholy and frustration and doubt about what I was doing. And so working with Deena, once I started to come into that community, it just accelerated and deepened everything and affirmed so much and then just taught me so much about what I really needed to be thinking about, which was, several stories down to where I was thinking.
And Sharon was definitely on the path. She just needed a community so that she could have the conversation with others. And creating community is so essential. It's one of the essential ways of the 19 ways.
So what is it about community? That probably sounds like an obvious question, but it's probably not so obvious in certain ways.
Well, because none of us can do it alone. The time of the hero, the great man or the great woman, that has proven incredibly dangerous. To name names, I would say that the best example of the great man complex is Elon Musk. And I think he's probably the most dangerous man on the planet at this time. The idea that one can just do what they want instead of that circle thing where you hold all beings' concern and particularity. You hold that all in the circle. So I don't know how people have responded to this hour, but I would not find it terribly interesting if I just came in and started talking and then ended and that was it. And I think the time of the lecture is over. The time of the thinking that one of us knows something and others do not. That in fact, the community validates the beautiful particularities of all beings, and that we care about each other, that we hold each other, that we know each other's stories, that we know each other's histories, that we care about everyone's history, present and future. Whether it's two-legged or a four-legged or a flying one or a standing person.
Something I've always noted is that within the standard conventional education system, that one's validation is by discovering something new. And in many traditional human cultures, or I would say also animal cultures, the maturation, the coming of age is discovering what's already known. And I guess I see that thread in terms of the way you're describing community as well.
Yeah, I mean, what do you really, really know? That's the question we asked in the 19 Ways last week or the week before, maybe. What do you know that you don't know you know? What is your deep knowing that you haven't been living by? What is the deep knowing you've been afraid to manifest? What did you know when you came in? We had this wonderful experience in one of the 19 Ways section where one of the members of the class just got married, and he married a woman who had a 12-year-old son. And so the young boy came over to his now new dad while we were on the 19 Ways, and he said hello to all of us, and just because I am who I am, I said, "Oh, hi, how are you? And do you dream?" And he said, "Yes, I dream." And Johanna, you were there, right? Were you there? And Otis, right? And I said, "Oh, could you tell us a dream?" "Oh, yes." And do you remember the dream, Johanna? It was about animals. Can you bring it up?
No, I can't remember. It's funny how it slides out. I cannot, but if it comes, I'll jump in. Lori was there too, I think. Lori, do you
remember the dream? Right.
I don't remember all of it. It was about mango trees.
Right.
He talked about how the tree was there and it produced mangoes. And then I can't remember, was it baboons or monkeys? Some beings came and ate the mangoes. So I remember in my seeing, see how he sees the interconnection, see how he sees the way that there's a relationship between the mangoes and the monkeys. That's what I remember.
Perfect. I think it was baboons. Yeah. It was so wonderful to have a 12-year-old completely present, willing to talk about a dream, intelligent, offering us something. That's community. And community is also when you can bring your grief, you can bring what breaks your heart. You can gather together to do what needs to be done. I don't know why I'm going here, but yesterday there was we were supposed to have a lodge on the land. We have a lodge, and a man by the name of Mark Wiegensberg leads the lodge, pours, and it, the weather report was kind of iffy. We were having the lodge because it had rained, and so we could heat the stones without fear of fire. And so people gathered. I was not there, but Johanna was there. And they were under a pop-up because it was raining a little, and really trying to decide, should we begin to heat the stones? And Mark uttered a prayer, sort of to spirit, and asking, really, do you want us to have a lodge? Are we supposed to have a lodge now? And the rain came down. So I'm telling this story because they were engaged in ceremony, which is a community activity. And ceremony are those rituals or events that create a connection between you and the spirit world. And here we were, the elements were respected, and they answered, and the rains came. And the way it rained, that's a real blessing. We could say it was your willingness to have lodge, to come together because the weather made it possible to come together, not because there was an arbitrary date. And then to have the rain come was really very, very beautiful. You can't do that alone. Do that together. We think together, we love together, we pray together, hold each other. Young and old, all of that. Two-legged and many-legged. They found a black widow spider, apparently a very large one, on the stones. Oh. And at this moment, this is a community. This is a community of concern. This is a community of common interests.
It is. It's an amazing community, and I'm so grateful to be here with everyone and be having these conversations. Does anyone have any other thoughts that they'd like to add?
Cheryl, you want to?
Oh, Lori, yeah.
Lori, and then Cheryl.
I just wanted to say, because you asked Deena about community, and you asked Sharon English about working with Deena and how it changes things. And so each of us individually has our own relationship with spirit, and we're people who are listening and following. But if you don't have community, there's no alternative culture to enter. So who I was before I came to the community was a confused woman trying to imagine another way to live and what the values of it would be, and how to respond to things. But I couldn't live, I couldn't make the step. I couldn't walk through because I didn't know what I was walking into. But there's a way in which the community is an alternative culture. And so then you're with people who are all holding the values of that culture, struggling with it because we all live in the dominant culture, but holding that and trying to discern the way you walk differently in this alternative culture. And so I think community is essential in order to change your own consciousness so that so that you understand that there is a field to enter. And Deena said before, then there's some way in which that alternative culture, we hope, will rise up and disperse, and more people will find it and join it, and that we will walk out of the old culture and into the new just by virtue of that's what we're looking at.
Beautiful. And like if you're a dreamer, as many people are, and you think maybe that's important, where are you going to go with that? You have to have a community. And in our community, the community is whoever's here, whoever walked through that turquoise gate. That's the definition of it. Whoever's heart opens to it. I don't know where I was going with that, but just that we learn, we are supported in our desire to live according to the wisdom that's given to us each in our individual way. And I don't know why, Cheryl, but if you don't have a thought, maybe you could tell us about how your great grandmother helped you become a storyteller.
Well, it's a big story.
Well, maybe you could tell it, as I say, haiku.
Well, okay, Deena, I can do that. Thank you for asking. So when I was about 9 years old, my great grandmother came to visit my grandmother. And I went there and I was just amazed by her. She slept on a mat in the kitchen in front of the sink by the oil stove. And it was a little mat. And she would sit there at night brushing her hair. And I would sit there with my back up against the cabinets underneath the sink. And she would tell me stories for hours. And I didn't really understand them because she spoke Alutiiq and Russian. And I only understood English. But I would sit there and I would just listen and listen. And this went on for 2 weeks. And then she had to leave. And that was the last time I ever seen her. And then throughout the years, I was known as the hallway poet in grades or in junior high, and was really into listening to different stories. And then I came to this community and really learned about story within the councils and through Deena's teachings, and really got involved in what story was. And then a couple years ago, I started storytelling. And then in December of last year, a book came out. And in the book from the Alutiiq Museum was the myth and legends. And I started reading the stories, and I came to the first story that I read was Raven's Eyes. And I started reading it. And I was like, oh, I know this story. I know this story. And I read on and I was just excited. I could feel it in my body. And as I got down to the bottom of it, I read who told the story and who it was translated from my great aunt, my great grandmother's sister. And then I started going through the book and I seen all the stories that she had given into the book. And I realized I knew all those stories. So for all those years, I had carried the stories in my heart, in the heart language that was shared with my great grandmother. And I was just amazed, understanding that my great grandmother and her sister were the storytellers of my people. And It's changed my life.
Thank you. I think that's a beautiful place to end.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Cheryl. That's just such a powerful story. And I
How
think
about a beautiful place to start?
Yeah. Start and end, full circle. Thank you so much, Deena, for sharing everything that you've shared today and for your wisdom and your vulnerability, and to everybody who asked questions and shared stories and dreams and comments and thoughts and gave for all of your insightful questions. It was really so wonderful to be here with all of you today and learn with you. And thank you also to everyone, both of our guests and our audience who've been with us now over the last 6 weeks or so. We've really explored such a wide range of topics, and it's been such an honor to learn and explore with all of you. And we will be starting Living One back up in the new year, and we hope you'll all join us for that as well. But thank you again, Deena. Thank you, Gay, and thank you to our audience.
And this will be taped and available so it can be shared.
Yes. Yep, this meeting is being recorded, and we will post this to the Crulos YouTube in the next few days. So keep your eyes on our social media, and Gay will of course send out an email again to everyone who registered with the link to the YouTube. Thank you, everybody. We hope you have a great rest of your Sunday, and we'll see you hopefully in the new year.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Deena. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.